Wow, man, groovy hair. Who's that guy? Where's the regular podcast guy that does this? Yeah, well, that's today's topic, man, is like, who am I and who are you? Hey, welcome to the I Am Podcast, where we answer all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask. I'm your host, Sean Webb. You saw that wig. I know you love it. I loved it. It was my little Halloween wig and glasses that I wore to go hang out with my son trick-or-treating and my wife. We walked around the neighborhood and did the whole thing for the 3-year-old. That was fun. So today's topic, I just kind of pulled out of thin air this morning based on something that I was reminded of in Ramana Maharshi's suggested meditation. And I believe it was Ramana Maharshi, but basically there was a suggested meditation that exists that is nothing more than going into meditation and asking the question, who am I? And the reason that this kind of came up is because in our Body, Mind, Spirit 101 lessons and our model of the mind and how it works and how all of our pain and suffering comes together and how our emotions come to be, the strict explanation of how our emotions are created, well, it has to do with sense of self. It has to do with who am I? And let me bend down here and grab my little diagrams for a second. Hold on. Right, so we have our sense of self map, and I'm sure you don't need a refresher, but for the folks who are new to this, our sense of self, we come into the world with a lot of information in our brains. And we already know how to digest, we already know how to circulate our blood, we already know how to pump the heart, we already know how to suckle on a nipple and climb up mommy's belly. It's really cool. Babies on day one can do that kind of stuff. Well, that's information and intelligence that exists within the cells themselves. But our mind comes into this world kind of as a clean slate. We don't know anything. We don't know language. We don't know math. We don't know how to lift a sandwich to our mouths. We have to learn all those things. And that's really a good design feature, I think, whether it's designed by God or designed by evolution, that we are able to come into this world as a clean slate. Because if we came into the world knowing how to live in it, or knowing how to live in yesterday's world, and a meteor hit the earth this morning, and now everything's all different, well, all the knowledge that we would have about living in yesterday's world would be useless. And we would have to forget all that and then learn all the new stuff, which would be more difficult than simply not having that stuff in the first place and simply learning from scratch on day one. So in order for us to survive in this world, it is a function of our brain to help us learn all of this stuff that we need to know about the world and about ourselves. And so it starts to define the world and all the things in it, and it starts to define ourself, because we need to understand about bears and how far that we can be away from a bear. And we also need to understand if we can jump over a 6-foot crevice and we can't jump over a 7-foot crevice. That's important stuff to know regarding surviving another day. So that's where this whole map comes in, is that our brains start to make maps of ourself, starts to make definitions of ourself, and starts to understand ourself, and starts to map our limitations and map our bodies and where they're at and that type of thing, so that we can jerk our hand away if something's flying at it or something tries to grab us or something like that. It's a function of the brain to create these self maps. Now, usually, and where neuroscience is right now, is they're identifying where the self maps are in the brain for the body itself. But the other thing that happens in our daily lives is that we start to make cognitive attachments. We start to say, okay, I'm my name, I am everything within the confines of my skin, I am a boy, I am whatever religious affiliation I have, whatever political affiliation I have, whatever my favorite color is, whatever my favorite sports team is, whatever my position is on pro-life, pro-choice. These are my schedules, this is my routine, this is the school I go to, these are my friends, these are my family, and all these things that we think about when we talk about listing ourselves is an attachment that goes on this attachment map. Now, why this who am I question is important from Ramana Maharshi, and why we would meditate on who am I, is because this really is an illusion in comparison to our true conscious self, our true nature of being. Because at any time you try to answer the question, who am I? Let's say I ask you, who are you? Well, you have to come up with an answer. And any answer that you come up with, be it your name, be it your status in society, be it your job, be it your whatever, your life story, all of that stuff isn't you. If you took any of these things away from you that you would try to answer to the question, who am I? You would still be left with that presence within you that is observing all of this stuff. If I took all your family members away, yeah, you'd be sad for a while, but you'd still be who you are. If I took your name away, you would still be who you are. If I took your job away, you would still be who you are. If I took your whole life story away, you would still exist in a space of consciousness, of presence, that you would observe and be who you are without these other things that you're pointing to, which are the things that go on our map. Now, the reason it's important to understand the self map and all the things that we attach to as our sense of self from our mind's perspective is that then, thanks to homeostasis and a couple other scientific phenomena, creates an expectation and or preference in your mind, which is part of the equation of emotion. So if you're attached to a football team, let's say, and your favorite football team, you would expect or prefer that they would win the game and they lose the big game. Well, these two are not balanced, so then it's a negative reaction, negative emotional reaction. If you do expect or prefer that the team wins the game and they do win the game, then this is balanced, and then this is a positive emotional reaction. If either one of these don't exist, no emotional reaction occurs. You can go back to the Body, Mind, Spirit 101 to get all that basics. But basically, half of the equation of emotion, half of all of your emotions in your entire life are fed from the expectation or preference associated with one of these attachments, right? If your kids are on your attachment map and you expect them or prefer them to get good grades and they don't get good grades, well, all of a sudden there's an imbalance in the equation of emotion and you don't feel so good about those not so good grades. You're like, well, am I being a bad parent? Am I not educating the child enough? Are they not trying enough? Are they not smart enough? So then you have this whole thing going on multiple attachments associated with your child and the valuation that is perceived when they get good or bad grades. So it all comes down to this sense of self. It all comes down to, who am I? Now, the trick that Ramana Maharshi and the who am I meditation comes into is that all of this stuff is an illusion. It's simply the things that your mind can point to when you're talking about asking yourself the question, who am I? So all of these things are representative of your life and your history and the things that you're associated with and your preferences, your likes and dislikes and yada, 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 or the people you're attached to or whatever. But it's not really you. These are the things that are simply attached to your outer life. It's not the inner consciousness. It's not the awareness. It's not that space within you that exists that's watching all this stuff go on. The trick is that the who am I meditation is supposed to lead you to the reality that all of this stuff is illusion and that there's a deeper truth to the who am I question. And that is that you are the consciousness observing existence underneath all of these attachments. And this phenomenon of enlightenment, which we talk about frequently, is simply the experience and the realization of that existence, of that who am I existence at the deepest level. And so when you're sitting there meditating on the who am I, there are two important factors to that meditation. One is that you look at all this stuff and you realize, well, none of this stuff is really who I am. It may be a role that I'm playing in my family or my society or my job, or it may be a preference that I have, a like or a dislike, a favorite color, a favorite sports team, or whatever. It may be, one of a number of things that you can attach to, an idea that I think people shouldn't have an abortion or people should have the right to have an abortion. All of these things become attachments, but they don't define you. They are simply part of your human existence. And so the part one of the who am I meditation is to realize that all this stuff here is simply a mindful attachment. And we've been teaching in this podcast that when we take control of these mindful attachments and when we take control of our expectations and preferences and our perceptions, we can control our entire emotional landscape. We can take control of our pain and suffering and push it off to the side and let it wish it could exist within us. But the other side of that I am, or that who am I meditation is, well, who am I under all this? Because that's something that can't be answered with the mind. It has to be answered through experience. It has to be answered through discovering it and simply being with it. And that's what meditation is all about. And so if you're using that who am I meditation, you're on the right track in two different ways. One, you get to see all of the things that you could answer, because anything that you can answer to the question, who am I, is going to be your false self. It's going to be the self that can be represented through words. And the reality of your existence is that it can't be represented through words. It can't be defined verbally, or even really through any type of concept that can be communicated from one person to another. The answer to the who am I question is deeper. It exists on a more profound and more fundamental level than any of these things that we can point to in our world. You know, our existence, our awareness, our consciousness is that which supersedes and precedes all of the connections and all of the attachments that we have, both at the same time, which is one of those cool paradoxes of spirituality. And so if you want to try that, you go into meditation, you say, who am I, who am I, who am I? And remember, meditation, one of the goals of meditation is to clear your mind and to clear the noise and shut down the default mode network. And if you're focusing on one thing and you're consciously focused on repeating, who am I, who am I, who am I? Just like you would go into meditation focusing on your breath, or you'd go into meditation focusing on another chant, or you'd go into meditation, or like the Catholics, they'll go into meditation or a prayer, and they'll repeat over and over and over a bunch of Hail Marys or Our Fathers or whatever. Well, that's designed to focus your mind down to one thing. You're focused on the one thing and the one thing only. You're doing that one thing. And what is that? Well, that's one step away from thinking of no thing, to having your mind completely cleared, to having your thoughts cease. And as we discussed in other episodes, at that point that your mind is shut down, there is scientific evidence that suggests that certain chemicals are then released in your brain, including the endogenous dimethyltryptamine in your brain, that can cause the enlightenment experience, that can basically overwhelm all of your brain, throw it into a glutamatergic storm, shut down your default mode network, kill much of your ego scientifically, a bunch of cool stuff going on there that you can pick up in the previous episodes. I think episode 100 was a really good episode to explain the science behind enlightenment. But the step to get there, or a step to get there, sit down, start meditating. Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Because the answer is going to be underneath all of this false self that causes all of our pain and suffering. All right, so anyway, shorter episode for today, but it's important because I think it's a very foundational message that we need to be reminded of, is that we need to look for the self, we need to look for the I am underneath anything that could occur after the I am. I am a Jets fan, or I am a boy, or I am a staunch Republicrat, or whatever it is that your identification of self is. There's a self underneath that, and you can find it by asking, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And ignoring everything that you could answer to that question. I hope things are well with you guys this week. I'm a little hoarse, so I'm just going to end this episode here. Hope you guys are finding your inner being, and that this podcast is helping you do that. If you guys want to send a little bit of contribution in for us, or buy me lunch, or buy me a beer, or whatever, you can do so on the website, iamspirituality.com. You can also get a free book at Audible, And by going to audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality, and you sign up for the 30-day free trial, if you support them, they support us. So that's another way that you can support us and also get a benefit out of that. Check it out. They have awesome books, over 150,000 titles, all read by either the author themselves, which is really cool, or a professional voice talent if the author's voice sucks, which is also cool. So check those guys out. Hope you guys are well, and I'll talk to you soon. Peace.